have never said this properly before, not even to myself, but I trusted what I was told because it was easier than questioning it. I believed the version of my life that was handed to me. I accepted it quietly and without protest. I told myself that not everything needs to be examined too closely, especially when the people involved are your own. There was comfort in that belief, comfort in thinking that what I knew was enough. Now, when I look back, I can see how carefully I avoided certain thoughts, how I chose calm over curiosity, how I ignored the small unease that settled in me from time to time. I thought I was being sensible. I thought I was protecting myself. I didn't realize I was being protected from the truth. I won't lie. Part of me still wishes I had never found out. Life felt simpler before everything shifted, before I had to sit with the knowledge that what I believed for years was not the whole story. What made this matter so deeply was not the information itself, but what it touched inside me. It wasn't about facts on paper or dates or details. It was about trust, about feeling that the ground beneath my life was solid. I had always believed that honesty was the quiet foundation of our family, not spoken about, just understood. I believed that even when things were difficult, the truth would not be hidden from me. That belief shaped how I saw myself. It allowed me to feel secure, included, respected. I didn't need control, I just needed to know where I stood. Over the years, I had built my sense of self around that assumption, that I was trusted with the truth even when it was uncomfortable, that I was considered capable of handling reality. There was a dignity in that, a sense of being an adult in my own life. Slowly, without me realizing it, that dignity was put at risk, not taken violently, but softened, smoothed over, wrapped in reassurances. Something fundamental began to slip, and I couldn't name it at the time. I just knew there was a faint disconnect between what I felt and what I was told. I kept dismissing it, telling myself not to be dramatic, not to imagine problems where there were none. Still, something had gone wrong, and I was living inside it without understanding why. It didn't begin with a lie that I could point to. It began with omissions, small ones, perfectly reasonable ones. There were conversations that seemed to skip over details, stories that ended a little too neatly. I noticed it first in passing remarks, a comment that didn't quite align with something I remembered. I would pause, consider asking, then let it go. I told myself memory plays tricks as you get older. That I was probably mistaken. I didn't want to appear confused or suspicious. I valued harmony. I'd always believed that keeping things smooth was part of being mature. Over time, these moments began to collect quietly. Nothing dramatic, just a sense that certain topics were brushed past more quickly than others. When I lingered on them, the response was light, reassuring, and final. There was no invitation to explore further. I accepted that. I kept my head down. I didn't want to kick up a fuss over things that might not even matter. I started to notice how often decisions were described after they had already been made. Not big ones at first, just arrangements, plans, things that affected me but were framed as settled. I would nod and agree, even if something inside me hesitated. I didn't want to seem difficult. I told myself that this was simply how life evolves, that as time goes on, roles shift, that it was normal. Still, there were moments when I felt oddly out of step with my own life, as if I was being updated rather than consulted. I felt a mild embarrassment about that feeling, as though it reflected poorly on me. I pushed it away. There were silences, too, the kind that arrive unexpectedly. Conversations would pause when I entered the room, not abruptly, but enough to notice. I would smile and carry on as though nothing had changed. I didn't want to read too much into it. I valued being easy to live with. I had always prided myself on that. I told myself it was just coincidence. that people are entitled to private conversations, yet the pattern repeated often enough to leave a mark. I began to feel slightly separate, not excluded exactly, but peripheral. I adjusted without making a sound. I remember one afternoon when I overheard part of a conversation that stopped just as I came closer. It wasn't anything specific. No raised voices, just a shift, a change in tone. I stood there for a moment longer than necessary, waiting for someone to include me. They didn't. I walked away feeling faintly foolish for expecting it. That feeling stayed with me longer than I expected. It sat quietly in my chest, unresolved. As time went on, I noticed how questions were met with reassurance rather than answers. Don't worry about it. It's all sorted. There's no need to think about that. The words were kind, but they closed doors. I didn't push back. I told myself I was being looked after, that this was what care looked like. Still, I felt a subtle loss of agency, a sense that curiosity was no longer welcome. I began to censor myself, to choose silence over uncertainty. I didn't like how that felt, but I didn't know how to challenge it without creating tension. I started to feel hesitant in ways I never had before. Before asking anything, I would weigh whether it was worth the discomfort it might cause. Often, I decided it wasn't. I learned to keep things light, to stick to safe topics, and it made interactions smoother, but it also made them thinner. I miss the depth we used to have, even if I couldn't pinpoint when it disappeared. I told myself that closeness changes over time, that it was unrealistic to expect things to stay the same. There were moments when I felt slightly patronized, though no one meant to be unkind. Explanations became simpler, tones softer, as if I needed to be shielded from complexity. That unsettled me more than I admitted. I had always been capable. I had navigated challenges quietly for decades. Now I felt as though my resilience was being underestimated. I didn't argue. I absorbed it. The doubts came in waves. I would feel certain that something was being kept from me, then feel guilty for thinking it. I didn't want to distrust the people closest to me. That felt disloyal. I reminded myself of all the good intentions, all the care I was shown. I told myself not to be suspicious, to be grateful. Still, the sense of unease returned again and again, usually in quiet moments, late at night, early in the morning, when there was no one else to distract me. I noticed how my role had subtly shifted. I was no longer at the center of things. I was being informed rather than involved. Decisions were presented as settled facts. I accepted them outwardly, but inside I felt increasingly disconnected. I began to wonder when that change had happened. I couldn't identify a single moment. It had happened gradually, which made it harder to question. There was no obvious wrong, just a growing sense that something essential was missing. I remember finding a document one day that referenced an arrangement I knew nothing about. It was lying among other papers, easy to overlook. I read it twice, slowly. My name was there, but my voice was not. I felt a flicker of panic, quickly followed by denial. I told myself there must be an explanation, that I was misunderstanding something. I placed it back where I found it and didn't mention it. That choice stayed with me. It was the moment I chose comfort over clarity. After that, I became more alert. I listened more carefully. I noticed how often details were glossed over, how quickly conversations moved on when they approached certain subjects. I felt a growing awareness that something was being managed carefully, not maliciously, but deliberately. I didn't know why. That not knowing was harder than I expected. It made me feel small, uncertain. I didn't like the version of myself that emerged from that feeling. The turning point came by accident, not through confrontation, not through courage. It came through an ordinary moment that went wrong. I was looking for something mundane, a piece of information I needed for a routine task. I opened a folder I had never looked in before. Inside were documents I had not been meant to see. I recognized the significance immediately. There was no confusion, no room for reinterpretation. The truth was there, quiet and undeniable. It wasn't one thing, it was a pattern, a history, evidence of decisions made without my knowledge over years. I felt my body go still, my thoughts slowed. I remember sitting down because my legs felt unsteady. I didn't cry, I didn't panic. I felt a deep, hollow shock, the kind that drains the room of sound. I realized then that I had been lied to for years. That was the moment everything shifted. The truth unfolded quickly after that because it no longer needed to be hidden. When I asked, the answers came, calmly, carefully. I was told it was done to protect me, that it seemed easier not to involve me, that they thought I wouldn't want to know. I listened, I nodded. I felt something break quietly inside me. There was no anger at first, just grief. Grief for the years I had lived believing something that wasn't true. Grief for the trust that had been handled so lightly. I felt foolish, not because I had been deceived, but because I had ignored my instincts. I should have known better. The consequences were not dramatic. There was no shouting, no clear villain, just a shift in how I saw everything. Conversations felt different. I heard what was not being said. I noticed the careful phrasing. I felt a distance where there used to be ease. Trust did not disappear overnight. It thinned. I found myself questioning even simple assurances. I didn't want to live like that, but I couldn't undo what I knew. I began to doubt myself in new ways. I wondered how much else I had missed, how often I had been excluded without noticing. That uncertainty was exhausting. I felt older than my years, not physically, but emotionally. I mourned the version of myself who had felt secure, who had believed without hesitation. That loss was quiet, but profound. I tried to rebuild some sense of control. I asked more questions. I insisted on being informed. It was uncomfortable. I was told I was overthinking things, that it was all in the past, but it wasn't in the past for me. It lived in the present, shaping how I felt in every interaction. I learned how fragile trust can be, how easily it can be eroded by good intentions. Over time, I adjusted. I became more guarded, more deliberate in what I shared. I still cared deeply, but I no longer assumed honesty as a given. That change saddened me. I didn't want to live cautiously, but I had learned that openness carries risk. I live with that knowledge now. Looking back, I see how quietly it all happened, how reasonable it sounded at each step. I understand why they made the choices they did. Even if I don't agree with them, I don't hold on to anger. It would cost too much. Instead, I carry a clearer understanding of myself, of my need to be included, of my right to know my own story. I still believe in family. I still value connection, but I no longer confuse silence with peace or reassurance with truth. I listen to myself now, even when it's uncomfortable, especially then. What would you have done if you were me? After that discovery, nothing around me looked the same. The rooms were familiar, but the feeling in them had shifted. I moved through my days more carefully, as if I might disturb something fragile. I noticed how often I replayed conversations in my head, looking for what I had missed, the pauses, the softened answers, the moments where I had been gently steered away. It surprised me how tired I felt, not physically, but in a way that settled deep in my bones. Knowing the truth takes energy. Holding it quietly takes even more. I went about my routines, shopping, cooking, tidying, but everything felt slightly heavier, as if I was carrying something unseen. I found myself watching people more closely, not suspiciously, just attentively, Listening not only to what was said, but to how it was said, I noticed how explanations were framed, how reassurance arrived quickly, almost too quickly. It made me aware of how easily language can be used to smooth things over. There were moments when I wanted to say more, to ask why, to ask how long, to ask who decided I couldn't handle it. Those questions stayed with me unspoken. They felt too sharp to release. I didn't want to cause damage I couldn't undo. Still, they lived quietly inside me. What hurt most was not the lying itself. It was the assumption underneath it that I was better off not knowing, that my feelings mattered more than my autonomy, that protecting me meant excluding me. That realization sat heavily with me. I had always believed care and honesty went together. Now I understood they don't always. I began to see how often I had been underestimated, not openly, not cruelly, but subtly, as if my resilience had been quietly forgotten. That hurt in ways I didn't expect. I had survived plenty in my life: loss, disappointment, loneliness, and yet somehow the truth had been deemed too much for me. There were days I felt embarrassed by my own grief. I told myself it could have been worse, that others had suffered more, that I should be grateful for what I still had. Those thoughts didn't help. They only made me quieter. More withdrawn, I realized then how loneliness can exist even when you are not alone. It is the loneliness of being unseen, of having parts of your life decided without your presence. That kind of loneliness doesn't announce itself. It settles slowly. I noticed how my confidence had changed. I hesitated before making decisions. Even small ones, I second-guessed myself, wondering if there was something I still didn't know, something else being handled out of sight. That uncertainty was unsettling. It made me feel less steady in my own skin. I tried to ground myself in what I could control. Simple things, my routines, my space, my thoughts. I reminded myself that my feelings were real, that my reaction was not unreasonable, that being hurt did not mean being weak. There were moments of anger, quiet ones. They came unexpectedly. Usually when I was alone, washing up, folding clothes, I would feel a sudden surge of it. Then it would pass, leaving behind sadness. Anger required more energy than I had. I thought often about trust, how easily it is given, how slowly it is rebuilt. I wondered whether it ever truly returns to what it was, or whether it always comes back, altered, more cautious, more conditional. I didn't want to become bitter. That was important to me. I didn't want this to harden me. So I let myself feel what I felt without feeding it. I acknowledged the pain, then I carried on. Over time, I began to speak up more, not dramatically, just clearly. I asked to be included, to be informed. It wasn't always welcomed. There were awkward moments, defensive responses, but I stayed calm. I stayed present. Each time I spoke, I felt a small piece of myself return, not the same as before, but steadier, more rooted. I realized I had been shrinking to keep things peaceful. Now I was learning how to exist without apologizing for my awareness. Some relationships shifted again after that, not for the better or worse, just differently. There was more distance, but also more honesty. Even when it was uncomfortable, I preferred that I learned something about myself through all this, that I value truth even when it hurts, that being protected without consent feels like erasure. That dignity matters more to me than ease. Life has not fallen apart. It has simply rearranged itself. More quietly, more honestly, I live with a clearer sense of where I stand and what I need. I still have moments where the sadness returns, where I grieve the simplicity I once had, the unquestioned trust, the ease of believing those moments pass. I am still here, still myself, just more awake, more careful with my trust. and more determined not to give away my right to know my own life.